Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas, here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon on Law for the People with your host, me, Eric Cedillo. As you guys know, we come to you every Friday from 1 to 3, discussing a variety of different matters, usually having some wonderful guests on. One that we're having this afternoon that I'm particularly, impressed with and very glad to have on the show, and I'll introduce him in a second. But as always, on Law for the People, we're coming to you from Dallas, Texas. The stuff that we talk about, some of the law that we kind of cover is mainly geared towards Texas law. I know some of you guys are listening in from different parts of the world, different countries, right, Fern? Certainly different parts of the United States. So just kind of always keep that in mind when we talk about the law. Specifically, it may be a little bit different in your jurisdiction. So let's jump right to it. Like I said, I'm very happy to introduce our first guest this afternoon, Mr. Colin Allred, who is running for the House of Representatives in the 32nd Congressional District. Colin, why don't you just say hello to the folks and kind of introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much, Eric. I really appreciate you for having me on. My name is Colin Allred. I'm running for Congress here in Dallas and the Dallas area. So it's the Texas 32nd Congressional District. It's currently held by a guy named Pete Sessions, who we have a few plans to knock off here in the fall. And it's also my home, where I was born and raised, and it's also where we're sitting now. So. Yeah,
and I really want to get into that. I really have had the opportunity, I think, to hear your story and other things like that, and I really want to get into that. You know, it's kind of what we do here on the show. We talk to folks and kind of get down to who you are. So why don't we start with that? And then we'll get into the actual running and the platforms in a bit. But just kind of tell us, I know you're from Dallas. I know you went to high school here. Why don't you just start there?
Yeah, so I was born and raised here in Dallas. Spent the first few years of my life over in Oak Lawn, right off Maple, and went to Maple Lawn Elementary, if you know where that is over there. Yeah. My mom was a single mother. She had me kind of later in life. Yeah. She's a public school teacher. She'd been teaching in the Valley when she was growing up. My family's from Brownsville originally. Oh, yeah. And then she moved up here to Dallas and was teaching here. And my aunt, who's her sister, was also teaching here at Plano East. Yeah. And my mom, I think at that time, was teaching at Roosevelt High School, unless I'm misremembering which high school she was at the time. Yeah. And so when I was 7 years old, my aunt came by one day and started talking to my mom, and they made a plan to buy a house a street over from where they lived at Hillcrest and Beltline over in North Dallas, and rent it to my mom. Okay. And allow us to move there and to go to a different school and to kind of get into a neighborhood that was a little bit better. Yeah. And so for over 20 years, we rented that house over in North Dallas. And so that's how I ended up getting in the school district to go to Pershing Elementary, where I went to elementary school for the last few years of elementary, to Franklin Middle School, Hillcrest High School. So anybody in Dallas here knows those are kind of landmarks you drive by quite a bit. And so that was kind of my path, and it changed a lot of things for me. And I'm one of those people who understands that there but for the grace of God go I. Yeah. Because growing up, my mom and I did not have very much money. Yeah. We do not pay our teachers nearly enough. Yeah. And what we do pay them, they have to also spend out of their own pockets to take care of their kids in so many cases. And we didn't have a lot of social status or anything like that. But we did have my aunt and uncle who were very helpful. We had this kind of some community organizations here that I think were a big impact in my life. Yeah. So I went to good public schools here. All the schools that I mentioned, Pershing, Franklin, and Hillcrest, are excellent schools and are still doing pretty well today, even though they need some additional help. Yeah. But I also spent a lot of time at the YMCA. I'm one of these kids who is a YMCA kid. Yeah. So there was a YMCA after-school care program that used to come to my elementary school, and you would, from the time school let out to about 6:30 or so at night, when my mom would get off her second job, which was the homework hotline. I would play there, be able to do my homework with some supervision, play sports, interact with other kids. Since I was an only child, I needed that kind of interaction. And that was a lot better for me than going home and being at home by myself and not having any supervision. And I think we see that today. We need more programs like that. Yeah. Kids, it has a huge impact in my life. Huge. I mean, I can't even overstate how important it's been in my life. In fact, On Sunday was my birthday, and I got a text from one of my counselors who was a guy who I met, who was my after-school care counselor way back then, who now still works in the YMCA, he's running one of the local YMCAs here, so he's moved up the chain. But he and I are still friends, and he texted me and said happy birthday, and so that's how important those relationships were, that we're still in touch.
That's very cool. Happy belated birthday, first off.
Yeah,
absolutely. I kind of grew up in the same way. My mother kind of realized the need for education. She sent us to Catholic private schools, and although they were kind of tough because you didn't see many kids of color there, the education was certainly one that was kind of the foundation for everything. So your mom as a teacher, I'm assuming, realized that, kind of put you in a situation that gave you the best opportunity. You mentioned your aunt and your uncle. Kind of helping out a little bit. Was your uncle something of a father figure?
He was, absolutely. My uncle was a graduate of Jesuit. He's went to seminary for a year, thought about becoming a priest. Got me baptized over at St. Rita's, and was also a scientist. He's a physics PhD.
Wow.
Yeah, so and my aunt's also, she also has a chemistry PhD, and so they're high-powered intellectuals, both of them. And he worked for the government for.
Which is the relation to is it mom?
My aunt is my mom's sister.
Okay.
And my uncle's her husband. They met at UT down in Austin.
Okay.
And got married there, and then went on and pursued careers in science. And my uncle's one of these guys who was not very athletic, but who always helped me with all my sports. So I was always playing sports. My uncle, wasn't a natural athlete.
Until you were about 11 or 12, and they couldn't help you anymore.
Well, he would still be trying.
Still try?
Like he would catch me when I was pitching, and take a few in the face every now and then, But he was always there, and he came to all of my games, was involved in all of that, and was also my tutor when I needed it, especially in math and science stuff. And so he's a big influence in my life. And he's not a direct blood relative of mine, but he's certainly been more important than somebody who you just get DNA from but don't get much else from.
Absolutely.
And so he's been a big influence in my life, and certainly my aunt as well. So my mom and my aunt were both teachers, and so I come from a long line of educators. My grandmother also taught, and so they all had a belief in education, and even though I showed early athleticism and ability in sports, they never let that become more important than school. Everything was always do your homework first. If you get a good grade, then you can go do your sports. And so that was also for me a good motivator because I wanted to play. And so I had to get my grades right, and certainly if I ever got in trouble, you knew whose side my family was going to take. It was always going to be the teacher's side.
That's right. Now you were an NFL football player, so we'll talk about that in a few. You mentioned baseball though. Were you a good baseball player as well?
Baseball was my passion. It's still my favorite sport. Growing up, I thought that I'd be a center fielder playing for the Rangers. I actually was recruited by not recruited, but followed by some Major League Scouts for a while when I was playing at Hillcrest. I ended up kind of growing a little bit out of the, I think, ideal body type for what I was, because I had a good throwing motion from the outfield, and as I got bulkier, it started to get a little bit harder. But I was always a power hitter. I never got cheated. I took my cuts, and I really, really loved baseball, and I loved kind of the history of baseball too, and how for so long it had been an important, not only sport, but cultural indicator for us. I grew up loving Jackie Robinson and loving just the idea that was part of not only integrating baseball, but integrating our country. Great players that we had here. The Rangers were heroes of mine. And so it just, it was a sport that I really loved, but it ended up not being the sport that I was best at. And so football for me was something I didn't play until middle school. I didn't play peewee, I didn't do any of that kind of stuff. And when I started playing, I was a quarterback and playing safety. And it just kind of worked out that I kept growing and kind of filling out. And so they moved me to running back and linebacker. And linebacker is what ended up sticking because I was fast and big and had the ability to cover people. And so I had a combination of skills that kind of helped with that. but it wasn't my sport that I focused on really until I got to college when there was no other option. It was just
Really?
to get ready for football. Yeah.
Did you get into, I would imagine, scholarship
Yes,
into college?
yeah. So I started getting recruited my sophomore year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
I got a letter in the mail from Purdue offering me a scholarship. And, I was a DISD kid. I didn't know where Purdue was.
Yeah,
you know? And I remember they called me and they asked if I was willing to commit early to them. And I said, you're going to have to first tell me exactly where Purdue is. I think they realized that probably wasn't going to work out.
Yeah.
And so, college coaches at Hillcrest in the year that I graduated, 2001, the football season of 2000, we went 10-0 in the regular season, and we had several D1, Division I recruits on that team. And so we had a kind of a rotating cast of top coaches coming in and talking to us. And our quarterback, actually, a guy named Ryan Gilbert, was the best player that we had. And Nick Saban, who was coaching for LSU at the time, came by and was recruiting Ryan. And I talked to him a little bit. And Ryan ended up going to LSU. But I was the one who ended up making it, to the NFL.
What happened to Ryan? I remember the name.
Right. Yeah, he was a great player.
Yeah.
He's the best high school quarterback that I still have ever seen.
How did he do in college?
He did great.
Yeah.
He transferred from LSU to Houston when there was kind of a logjam at the running back position for him.
Right.
And he had a great senior season, and he was invited to the combine for the NFL. And he and I were training together in Houston at a place that prepares college prospects for the NFL.
Yeah.
And he tore his ACL though late in his senior season, and he just had a hard time recovering from that. And that's just a hard time to have an injury like that, unless the teams are willing to take a risk on you.
Right.
And so I don't think he ended up getting signed, and I think he had a hard time then getting picked up after that.
Yeah.
And so this is why I say though that there before the grace of God go wide, because there is so much luck involved in so many of these stages. I've played with people at every level of football, from high school to college to the NFL, who were better players than I was, who I thought had a better chance of continuing their career, but for different reasons had things that sidelined them or kind of sidetracked them. And that's the way life goes. You know, I mean, there has to be an element of luck, and so I got lucky. I do think though that the harder I worked, the luckier I got.
All right.
But I certainly had an element of getting lucky there.
So you actually you go to the NFL out of college?
Yeah. So I went to Baylor University. I was there when we were terrible. I got there under a head coach named Kevin Steele, who was struggling. And then we brought in a coach named Guy Morris, who had been in Kentucky and who I loved.
Yeah.
He had been a player in the NFL for 10 years. Yeah. He was a player's coach. He expected accountability from his players, and he gave them respect in return. Yeah. And he was one of these guys who you really wanted to run through a wall for. And he put together a good staff that I enjoyed. And that's when I really started to pick up and play really well. And so our last couple of years, we did better. And in our last year, we finished, when I was captain of the team and got some other awards, we finished 5-7, which for us was really good because we lost 2 of those games in double overtime at A&M and at Oklahoma. So we were very close to being 7-5. That was by far the best record we'd ever had in the Big 12 at that point. Now, a couple of years later, RG3 comes in with the new coach, and then now all that sounds like ancient history. Yeah. But back then, that was the best that we'd finished. Right. And so it was a tough transition for me initially from Hillcrest and Dallas to Baylor because we get there and there's a lot of kids there who had a lot of money. They come from a totally different background than we did. It wasn't the most diverse school in the world, so you're one of the few students of color, in some of the classes that you're sitting in. And so it took me a couple years to get adjusted, but I ended up really loving it and really enjoying it. Had a great time in Waco. Enjoyed my teammates was certainly my favorite part of it. And I was getting ready to go to law school. I took my LSAT. Was a history major. Had done well in school. It was all academic, all Big 12 and all these things, and was prepared to go to law school. Sent off my applications and started getting calls from agents wanting to represent me in the NFL. Oh. And I honestly told them that you have the wrong guy. Really? I thought that because I started a few games. I played on a team that wasn't that great, and I thought. And I played well my senior year, but I didn't think that I was an NFL prospect. Yeah. And there was no reason for me to assume that I was. And they kept saying, no, we want to represent you. And I said, well, I'm going to have to see some proof that this is actually an option. Yeah. And so one of the agents who was recruiting me sent me my report from my junior year that kind of estimated where I'd be drafted, and it had me as a 5th to 7th round draft pick, and
Wow.
said that I had a chance to, to be an NFL player. And I thought, okay, well, I guess that's real then,
What do they base that on? Do they base it on body type, speed, things like that, or is it the actual play?
It's both. The NFL tries to project,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of skill types that work in college that don't work in the NFL.
Right.
Because you have to have a certain baseline of athletic ability and size. Now, there are some special players who can overcome that. I'm thinking of guys like Doug Flutie and even Russell Wilson and some of these guys now who are not the perfect body type for their positions. But generally speaking, if you don't have that, unless you're a special guy, then you're going to have a hard time competing because it's just a leverage game. Like if your arms aren't long enough, you're never going to touch the guy who's trying to block you, and if you don't have enough speed, you're never going to catch the guy you're trying to tackle. And so there's a baseline of athleticism that they look for. Then they also try to project kind of what you're good at specifically and whether or not that translates to the NFL and to the speed of that game and to the way it's going to work out. And so, as we've seen in every draft, there's a lot of swings and misses, and you see that it's not a perfect science. But generally speaking, the scouts are pretty good at identifying within a pool of 300 or so, guys every year that this is going to be who's going to have a chance to play in the NFL. And from there, it's up to the players in a lot of ways.
So what happened with you?
Yeah, so I was undrafted, so I ended up not being drafted, even though I thought there was a good chance I might be picked up in the final rounds of the draft. And actually, probably worked out better that I wasn't, as I got to pick where I was going to go.
Right.
And so I'd worked out for a Hall of Fame scout named C.O. Bricado, who's passed away now. And C.O. Was the Oilers' long-time scout in Texas. And since the Oilers moved to Tennessee, he was still their Texas scout. And he did these local workouts, and I did one for him. And I thought I had done horribly. I thought because I had the wrong shoes for the day. It was a turf field, and I had cleats and all these things. And so I didn't think it had gone that well. And but apparently he thought he'd seen something. And so he called me after the draft and said, Colin, are you afraid to play in the NFL? And I said, no, sir, no, I'm not afraid. And he said, all right, well, I'm going to sign you. Okay, I didn't, he was a scout, so I didn't think that, scouts usually don't do the signings, it's usually like the GM and all that, but he could do his own signings, or at least recommend them, because he was C.O. Bricado, he's in the Hall of Fame. And so the Titans made me an offer, and I ended up accepting it over some other offers. Went out there, and I was they had drafted 10 people in their draft class. They had signed, I think 12 or 15 undrafted free agents, so one of 25 rookies coming in. Only 4 or 5 people, or 6 people maybe, are going to stick around and make that team. And ended up my first year getting cut in the final cut, but then later on that year when their GM was let go, they re-signed me because I guess they thought that I shouldn't have been cut. And I ended up making it the next 4 years and sticking around and having a career that was probably kind of improbable. And so that whole time I had deferred my law school admission. So I deferred my first 2 years. I accepted admission to California, Berkeley, and deferred. Then in my third year, they said, you're going to have to just reapply when you're ready, because we can't keep holding the spot for you, which is fine. And
was it a close call at all?
It was.
I'm going to go to law school, or I'm going to kind of...
Yeah, my family wanted me to go to law school. The whole NFL thing seemed like it was pretty...
I know if I would have been invited to play in the NFL, would have done that and deferred the
the
whole law school thing. But
my family was very practical, and they saw one thing that was a guaranteed thing and one thing that was very not guaranteed, and they thought, you should take this and run with it. And that's just how
instrumental were they? I find it really interesting. The decision to go to Baylor, the decision to move on for going to the NFL. Is that basically your mom, your aunt, and your uncle? Is that kind of you guys collectively getting together? Was that the extent of the family that you're kind of?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, and they had no experience with the sports side of it, so they're looking at it all as very, flimsy and kind of not sure what's going on with this whole football thing, and I understood that, and I had to make my own decisions though, and I felt I felt like to me that I wanted to prove that I could do it. More than anything, I wanted to prove that I could do it. I wasn't so concerned with having a super long career, and I wanted to show that I could do it, and because it felt like a challenge. And so when I accepted the offer to go to the Titans and I deferred, that wasn't like something that my family was really happy about, but it ended up working out because I earned enough money in the NFL to pay for my law school and to help out my mom some, and so and made a career. And I would have kept playing if I hadn't injured my neck. I had a serious neck injury in my 5th year and had neck surgery and all that.
Done a game in practice?
That was actually against the Cowboys here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my 5th year in our 5th game over in Jerry World, I'd been having neck problems all year, and it was something that had been building for really since the season before. And we call them stingers, where you get but it's really a nerve getting pinched is what it is. And so you get your arm goes numb and you get a really sharp pain. And there's nothing worse than nerve pain. Anybody out there who's had nerve pain knows what I'm talking about. And so I was having these stingers when I got hit a certain way, and I was trying to deal with it. But for a linebacker, it's very hard to avoid contact. And so I was, it was affecting my play some. And so in that game, I ran into Martellus Bennett, one of our tight ends here for the Cowboys, and who's just retired this year, actually. And Martellus is a really funny guy, so he could tell that I was hurt on the field, and he was like, "Man, are you okay?" Kind of face mask to face mask. Yeah. And I was like, and I'm lying on the ground, writhing in pain. She's like, "No, Martellus, obviously I'm not okay, right?" And so that was my last play. After the game, my mom was like, "What about next week?" And I was like, "Mom, I don't think there's going to be a next week," because the trainers and the coaches were kind of letting me manage it, and I realized that I couldn't manage it anymore, and I was going to have to go get it taken care of. And so we made an appointment with the orthopedic surgeon. I had a bulging disc and a couple of bone spurs in my nerve canal that were making it really hard for me to move my neck without getting some nerve pain. And so they did what they call a fusion surgery, where they took out that disc, fused those vertebrae, put in a plate and a couple of screws. And some people have come back and played with that. Peyton Manning played with that his last few years. The nerve damage is the more dangerous part, like how long it takes for your nerve to regenerate and all that. But as a linebacker, I thought it was too risky, just because it would put more pressure on my other parts of my neck, and I had law school sitting there, waiting to do. And I thought, my aunt was actually the one who said, you've already had the neck surgery. What's it going to have to take for you to retire? And so I thought about it, and I thought, she has a good point. And this is before we knew about any of these brain injury things, really. The research wasn't out there, and people weren't talking about it the way they are now. And so that wasn't really part of my decision making. I just thought, this is going to lead to something else, probably worse. I had an offer to keep playing from the Vikings.
Really?
Yeah. And I turned it down and went out to law school, and thought that I wanted to be an agent for a little while. Thought that I wanted to go back into sports, maybe represent clubs. It's there was a guy who worked for the Titans who did their contractual stuff and who was very involved in the way the club was run. That seemed like an appealing thing to me. I've been playing sports. It seemed like it's a natural fit.
Right.
But in my first year of law school, it became pretty clear to me that I was more interested in civil rights and constitutional law issues. And so it's kind of funny. Most people go to law school, I think, and change their mind about what they're going to do.
Yeah, very true.
I was one of them. So.
Yeah. So what did that look like? You're in law school. You're kind of figuring out your path in terms of where you're going. First job out of law school, what were you kind of?
Yeah. So in law school, my first year in law school, I had a constitutional law class with a guy named Ian Haney Lopez, who is a scholar and has written a lot of great things about kind of the intersection of race and the law and our Constitution. And he also went to Harvard with President Obama, and so he's a really well-known and well-respected scholar. And so I started working with him as a research assistant, and worked with him on a book called Dog Whistle Politics. Okay. And while I was doing that, I sent off an application to work in the White House as an intern in their White House counsel's office, and got accepted. And they brought me out there in my second summer of law school, and I worked in the White House and was involved in some really, really great stuff. I mean, it was a very fascinating time to be there. This was the year when the IRS kind of thing broke open, where they thought that the IRS was scrutinizing these Tea Party groups, which I think turned out to be a whole bunch of stuff about nothing. Yeah. But that was a big flashpoint then. There were several other big issues that came through, and the counsel's office in the White House reviews everything. At least in our White House, they did. And so they are really the hub. All policy, all issues that are going on a day at some point will touch the counsel's office and one of the attorneys in there. And so it's really kind of an interesting place to be, because you get a full view of the administration. And so I did that, did really well, and was asked to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Greenbelt, Maryland, and worked there as a law clerk, helping them with federal prosecution work. Did a lot of drug trafficking, human trafficking, gun issues. We had some immigration elements to it as well. U.S. Attorney's Office is also, I think, a really good way of seeing how our criminal system works and where the deficiencies are, and there are certainly some that I noticed. And then I graduated, and Wendy Davis is running for governor. And I decided that I wanted to come work on the campaign, and I'd been doing some voting rights work in law school, and so they were setting up a voting rights program, and so I got involved in that and became the Dallas-Fort Worth voting rights director, and that was a really interesting year because it was the first year of a major election that we had under our voter ID law, which, as you know, we've always had a voter ID law, but we didn't have a picture ID law, this photo ID law. Used to be, of course, when we vote growing up here, that you bring in your voter registration card with you, and that would be good, or you bring in a bill, and that would just anything that had your name and address, that was enough to vote with, and that was also something I think worked very well in our system. But the Republicans, in their wisdom in the state, decided to pass a photo ID law that had some really interesting choices. For example, they didn't accept student IDs that were issued by a school or by a county. In the case of DISD, issued by the district, but they would accept a concealed handgun license, and they wouldn't accept expired IDs, and they wouldn't accept out-of-state IDs. They'd only accept in-state IDs. And so it was a huge issue for us because we have a lot of voters here in this area and in this state who fall into those categories, who either don't have an ID that's an official state-issued ID. They might have a work ID, they might have a student ID, but they don't have that state-issued one. Or certainly our senior citizens, a lot of them have expired IDs. We have a lot of people who move here and who have out-of-state IDs, Louisiana folks, Oklahoma folks, Arkansas. I saw it all the time. In fact, we have 100,000 people a year moving to North Texas from out of state. And that kind of level of people moving here, that not all of them immediately get a new Texas driver's license. And so effectively under that law, they were barred from voting. And it was a big, big issue. And in fact, I saw just yesterday that in Wisconsin, a Republican up there basically claimed victory for Trump in Wisconsin in the election in 2016 based on their voter ID law. And we can talk about that a little later, but I was part of a lawsuit challenging that law in Wisconsin because we saw that it was going to have this effect. And when you have close elections, it'll certainly tip it to you. But in Texas, we specifically have a lot of people here who fall into vulnerable populations who are affected by that. And it's not just me that thinks that. The district court thought that. The Fifth Circuit actually agreed with that. The district court thought it again. And so 3 times now this law has been declared unconstitutional. But we had an election under it.
And intentionally discriminatory.
Intentionally discriminatory, not just accidentally targeted in order to be discriminatory. And the results of that election are still affecting us, right? Because the governor is in place because of that election. The other officers elected in that election. These discriminatory effects have real world impacts. We didn't expand Medicaid. There are people here who don't have health insurance right now because, I think in part because of discriminatory laws that we have in place here. And so that was a big battle. Voter registration is very difficult to do here, as you probably know. So we have a system here where if you want to register your neighbors to vote, you have to get deputized by the county. And not only that, but when you register someone to vote, you have 5 days to turn in their voter registration slip, or you are subject to criminal penalty. And this element of criminalizing voter registration, criminalizing getting involved in your own democracy, is one that is particularly pernicious for us because we have a lot of people who then don't want to get involved in that because the courts and all that, that's just a scary thing. They don't want to get involved in that. And so all this drives down voter turnout, drives down voter interaction. And so my job was to try and combat it as much as we could. And we kept Dallas County blue. It was a wave election for the Republicans. We very nearly lost some of our county officials here, but we kept it blue by the skin of our teeth, and I'm just proud of that. But the takeaway I took from it was that we have so much room to make up on making our elections more fair, more accessible for people. Our low voter turnout is not accidental. It's entirely predictable, and it's the product of policy. So.
Some of our off elections, non-gubernatorial, non-presidential, we're looking at 5%.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Right.
When you bring up that number, people are like, no way. And it's absolutely true.
Yeah. It's hard to run an area. It's hard to run a state, hard to run a country when that few people are involved in your democracy.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Absolutely. I really want to get into this, Colin. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to start talking about, some of the platforms, some of the policies that you wish to engage in as a House of Representative candidate, and really want to get into that and start talking a little bit more about policy. But you guys, you stay with us. We'll be back in about 2 minutes, and we'll revisit with Mr. Colin Allred.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at cedillolaw.com. That's cedillolaw.com.
Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas. Here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for rejoining us on Law for the People with your host, again, me, Eric Cedillo. We're here with our special guest, Mr. Colin Allred. And Colin, we've had an opportunity to kind of talk about you and your history and what has kind of brought you to this position. Now, in this part of the show, I'd love to get into some of the policies that you hope to bring to Congress. And before we do that, I'd really like to start talking to you a little bit about, we were touching upon some of the things that, in all honesty, the Republican Party has done to tamp down both minority voting,
Yes.
I think young people voting.
Yes.
It's very specific and concentrated. Tell me a little bit about some of the things that you're kind of seeing, because you've been through this stuff.
Yeah.
You've kind of worked on
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's three elements. There's trying to stop people from voting when they get to the polls. That's the voter ID law.
Yeah.
There's trying to stop people from going to the polls. That's your voter registration laws. And then there's trying to dilute their vote when they have it. That's what we call gerrymandering.
Right.
And so gerrymandering is I think the country is now becoming very aware of something where you draw districts in a way that no matter kind of what happens, you are likely to retain your seat because of the way the district is drawn. And we have this technology now that makes it extremely high tech. Like they can go street by street and know what the demographics are going to be, and very, with incredible precision, target a district and try to make sure that they keep that district red. So.
Right.
In 2000, when we picked up 4 seats as part of that, in 2010, I should say, as part of that census, 90% of our growth was people of color that came to this state, or that became eligible. So 90% of that growth, and so you would think that of those seats that we picked up, at least 3 would become Democratic seats, right? But the way the legislature drew those districts was to make sure they all were Republican seats, and so now we have this incredible disconnect between our voting, how many people are voting here on the Democratic side, and how many Democratic representatives we have in Congress. And even though in our elections that we've had where we didn't get more votes than the Republicans, that disconnect still means that we have several fewer Democratic votes in the Congress than we would. And it means I think that communities aren't getting to have the representation that they deserve. Yeah. So in Dallas, we've seen packing, where you pack in largely voters of color into districts, and cracking, where you crack some of these other districts by combining areas that maybe shouldn't have the same member of Congress. And this district is one that they try to gerrymander, certainly. But what we've seen is that there have been a lot of changes in this area that have kind of defeated the gerrymander. Yeah. And part of it is internal migration and people moving around our community here, but it also is what I mentioned earlier, which is we have so many people moving here from out of state and getting settled here now who weren't played into the considerations when they drew that district. Yeah. And so it's actually an extremely diverse district, the Texas 32nd. It's a 50% Anglo, 50% non-Anglo district. It looks a lot like the country, and I think it's one that, despite the efforts, I think we're going to have a chance to flip.
Yeah. Recently, of course, Secretary of Commerce comes out with a new question for the census, for the 2020 census, asking for, are you a citizen? Yeah. We haven't had that since 1950. Yeah. And what do you think the impetus behind that is, and the purpose?
I think it's a disastrous decision. It's one that I hope is and is being challenged in the courts, and I hope is overturned because it has incredible impact on us here in Texas.
Yeah.
And it's not just partisan. Now, the intent, I think, is to get a less accurate count. I think the intent is to reduce particularly the Latino interaction with the census. But the result for Texas will be fewer funds that we need for infrastructure, for schools, for healthcare. All of our funding mechanisms that in terms of drawing down federal funds are determined by population density, all that kind of stuff. It's all formulaic.
Right.
And so when you have an underrepresentation in your census count, which we would as an area that has a large Latino population, then you're going to get fewer dollars. But that doesn't mean that we'll have fewer people driving on our street or fewer people going to our schools
Right.
or going to our hospitals. It'll just mean that we have less money to do it with.
Right.
And how does that end up affecting you and your home? Well, that comes back to your property taxes. That comes back to you, having us running deficits here and having to cut state services. And so it will affect us in our pocketbook. It'll affect us in our home. And I think it's discriminatory. And I just think it's the wrong thing to do.
And I think when it came out, I would imagine that the governor, lieutenant governor of Texas would have been like, hey, what's up?
They
we
should
don't
be
need this.
Screaming at the hills about this.
Yeah, we don't hear that.
No, nothing. Because I think that they're thinking, okay, well, maybe this will affect us in a partisan way. But people don't want potholes.
Yeah.
People don't want to have overcrowded schools, and they don't. And I think it's short-sighted, even if you're looking at it from purely partisan lens. And so I just completely disagree.
We're talking about losing 2 or 3 seats.
Yes.
We're talking about the possibility of a $6 billion loss to our economy.
Right,
Yet
right.
our leadership down in Austin, isn't even batting an
It's
eye.
a dereliction of duty.
Yeah. One other thing. We've had some back and forth in terms of how this might scare people.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen certainly a demonization of immigrants
Yes.
through our current administration and what's happening. This is just another part of them kind of keeping us in the shadows,
Yes.
keeping our immigrant communities in the shadows and other things. Let's kind of step into that first question, one that is, of course, very important to me and a whole lot of folks, kind of listening in. Immigration.
Yeah.
I think we kind of see it through a couple of lenses. I think we have a tendency, this current administration kind of lumps it all together.
Right.
We've seen reductions in TPS
Yes.
for, certainly countries of color.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen, of course, the repeal of DACA.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. You
Yeah.
kind of getting into Congress and having opportunity to kind of voice your concerns. What do you think are some of the hot issues with
Yes.
respect to immigration?
As you said, immigration is not just one issue, it's multiple issues. And there's legal immigration, of course, there's also what we call undocumented or illegal immigration. And then there are these other elements, these temporary folks. TPS is a great point that you brought up there. There are so many people who came to this country as part of these TPS programs, have been here for decades, who are contributing to our economy, who Republican and Democratic presidents alike have renewed their status. And all of a sudden now, we've had a change in American policy, and it's only targeting people largely coming from countries in which they're people of color. And I think we have to recognize what's going on here. There are 2 things that I think we have to do. Number one, we have to stand up to the policies. So DACA and the DREAM Act, which is the legislation that would restore DACA, is something that we have to do. And I was extremely, extremely disappointed, Eric, when we did not use the leverage we had when the government was shut down to make sure that we got a clean DREAM Act. To me, there was no more important issue on the table. I would have stood on my desk till we got the DREAM Act. And I don't understand any level of discretionary spending that we got in return. That is not the real issue here. The real issue here, in my opinion, was taking care of these kids who were brought here through no fault of their own and who are every bit as American as I am and as you are, and who deserve to have their own country recognize them. And it's a moral issue. And to me, it's just unimaginable that the Democratic Party did not stand up more forcefully for that. And I hope that we can push for that in the next Congress. And so that's legislation. I think we need comprehensive immigration reform, of course, as well. We've had agreements between Republicans in the past. The Gang of Eight, you remember that with Marco?
Came that close.
It's so close.
Yeah.
Ted Kennedy worked with this, and when Bush was president, we almost got it even. We almost got it later. And at every moment, the far right has swept in, used fear tactics, scared the senators involved by, I guess, the threat of being primaried into not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we've left this patchwork system in which states are allowed to kind of make their own policies. And we've seen that here in Texas now with the Show Me Your Papers law, SB4, getting passed in our last legislative session. This is going to have a huge effect on us. And, either one of us could be pulled over at any time. I certainly don't have proof of citizenship on me. But more than that, it's something that it should be a federal policy that should be handling this. This should not be done patchwork state by state. And so we need to have a comprehensive plan of how we're going to handle the folks who are here. I think we have to give them a pathway to citizenship. And how we're going to handle our system going forward on who we admit to the country and the formulas we use for that, because all of that's out of date and needs to be updated. We need to have an immigration system that provides for our economy, that provides for our national security, of course, but that is fair. And right now it's not. And you're an immigration attorney, you know much better than I do the delays that are involved in this process and how just clunky it is, you know. And I think we have to recognize also that when Donald Trump says that he doesn't want to take people from S-hole countries, and when he says he doesn't want people from Nigeria coming here because they'll never go back to their huts, when he says he wants to get more people from Norway and Sweden, I think we have to recognize that this is a race-based policy that he wants to implement. And it's not who we are as a country. And it's not who we have been for some time now. And so we have to stand up. The second element of what I wanted to say, in addition to the policy, is stand up to the rhetoric and stand up to the way they talk about people. Because we are a country that is rapidly diversifying. By 2020, when we have our next candidates running for president, the majority of kids in this country will be non-white. That's what NPR says. And so our future, demographic future, is one of an extremely diverse country where we're going to have to form coalitions to work together to make our democracy work. And if we are allowed and if we are led into pitting ourselves against each other and seeing people of different colors or different national backgrounds or different national origins as the enemy and not as everybody as Americans we are, then we're going to come apart at the seams. Because our democracy relies on us being able to accept that we all might have come here on different ships, but that we're in the same boat now.
Right.
You know, and that's something I think that we as not just Democrats, but I hope some Republicans too will stand up and say, this is not who we are. We're a country that, you know, no matter where you come from, you can become American. And that's not true in every country around the world, but it has been true for us. And you know, I always say Donald Trump can't change who we are. This version of the Republican Party can't change who we are unless we let them. And if we can let them by ceding the ground on issues like this. Immigration has been used now as a wedge issue. But I think it's now getting at something much more fundamental, which is like who we are as a country.
Well, I'm so glad to hear about your position with respect to DACA. I was very disappointed with the way in which our leadership, of course, we're both Democrats, handled it. And I think we should have utilized that time to have done some things.
Had the leverage.
Exactly. And DACA, if people don't recognize it, these are some of just the best and the brightest. You talk about an incredible brain drain. If we were to lose our DACA recipients, not only to deportation, but the biggest, and people don't always realize that, work authorization, our ability to work in this country. We got about 20,000 teachers that take advantage of it.
We have a shortage of bilingual teachers.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous what we're doing to ourselves, what we're doing to our own economy. So I'm glad to hear you say that, and when you get in there, I'm going to hold you to it and say, hey, Colin, man, let's see that DACA legislation going on. Another hot topic that's kind of going around, and we've seen, and I'll be real honest with you, I've been the gun control that we've been seeing, or the push from young people. Certainly appreciate the efforts that are going on. I'm a little disappointed that it's at this point where it starts to gain traction when, some Anglo kids kind of come out and start pushing for it. When we have situations, quite honestly, where they've tried to demonize Black Lives Matter and other things and kind of put that, aside, brush it aside. It isn't until these other children, I guess people who can see my children, kind of come out and it becomes a hotter topic. But even with that said, your position on gun control.
Well, I think that this is an issue that we have dodged for too long as a country. We have crossed over into a space that I think we don't want to be in. And I think we have to get back to some common sense. Nothing radical, common sense stuff. From 1994 to 2004, we had an assault weapons ban in place. We saw a reduction in some of these mass shootings during that time. There has been a single weapon that has been used in almost all these shootings, and I think we all know what I'm talking about. And it is one that I think we should have a higher level of scrutiny on before you're able to get to buy it. I just don't think you should be able to walk into your local Walmart and buy it. It's a weapon that's not used for hunting.
Or a 13-year-old going in and purchasing something like that. Right.
It's not used for self-defense, really, because it's not the type of weapon you would use for that. It really has one purpose, and that's origin was for war, and it's used in a way that allows it to kill a lot of people in a short period of time. And so I think we need to have a higher level of scrutiny on that. And if you are able to buy that, you should have to go through a further check. I think we have to have universal background checks on the sale of all guns. Right now, we have two really large loopholes in our system. And this is something, by the way, that the majority, not only of Americans agree with, but the majority of NRA members agree with, is that when you buy a gun online or at a gun show, that you should have the same background check you would if you bought it from a licensed gun dealer. That's not a radical position. This is just that we want everyone who buys a weapon, a firearm, to go through the same background check. Background checks have flagged tens of thousands of people who should not have been able to get a gun and have stopped them from getting that gun. And they've been extremely effective. And this loophole is one that has allowed a lot of people to go around that, and criminals are aware of it. There was a study that President Obama cited when he was talking about after Sandy Hook that showed that one website that sold weapons, 1 out of every 30 people who were trying to purchase a gun on that website had a criminal record. And so people are aware of the loopholes and they can get around it. Al-Qaeda was directing their people to use our gun laws to get weapons and to attack our country because we haven't closed the terrorist loophole, meaning if you're on the terror watch list, you still can buy a gun in this country. That's a common sense thing. Now, what is really in the way here, Eric? Because I think all the polls show that the approval ratings of these things are extremely high, in the 90s. You know, there's one thing that's in the way, in my opinion, and it's money in politics. The influence of the gun lobby and of the NRA is directly related to how much money they pump into political campaigns. And I am running against Pete Sessions for Congress, who is one of the largest recipients of money from the NRA in the country. And he is somebody who has never stood up for us on these issues. When our kids aren't safe in their schools, when people worshiping in their places of worship aren't safe, when you can go to a music concert and have more people get shot and killed in that concert than we lost retaking Fallujah in Iraq, then we are not making our public spaces safe, and it's a public health issue. And people like Pete Sessions have stood in the way because they are getting paid very well not to be, at least in their campaigns they are. And so I think that we have to recognize that first we have to vote them out because until we put the equities on the side of doing the right thing, they're not going to do the right thing. And then when we do that, we need to make campaign finance reform, I think, part of our platform as Democrats because no one wants our democracy to be bought by special interests. And right now they are.
Absolutely.
You know? And the gun lobby is just a special interest. That's all it is. They want to sell more weapons. And that's their right to want to do that. But we as a democracy need to have some safeguards and checks so that if the majority will want something, that we can still get it done. You know, and I think we got to get back to some common sense here. It's not anything radical. I'm a Texan. I grew up around a lot of guns. I knew people who, you driving around South Texas, you'll see people with a gun rack in the back of their truck with a shotgun on there. That's not what we're talking about. And we're talking about, trying to prevent people who shouldn't have a weapon from having it and trying to keep weapons of war out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And that's really, I think, all Americans basically agree on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We got two other issues that I really wanted to touch upon before we kind of close up with you, Colin. Healthcare. Our healthcare system has gone through some fundamental changes over the last few years. What is the state, in your opinion, of healthcare, and what do you plan on doing about it?
Yeah, I think I'll be very brief here. I know we're running out of time. So health insurance and our healthcare system, I think, is broken. We pay more than the rest of the world for less coverage. And here in Dallas County, we are particularly having a hard time. We have 1 in 5 people in Dallas County, according to the census, who don't have health insurance. That's higher than the state average of 1 in 6, which is the highest in the country. So when you have 20% of people who don't have health insurance, they're still going to get some health care. The way they do it, though, is at the emergency room. They do it through Parkland Hospital. And all of us then bear the cost of that in our property taxes. And I think it's the wrong thing to do. And so I think what we have to do is two things. We have to provide universal coverage and control costs. I think the best way to do that is to have what we call a public option, a publicly available, low-cost option that people can get into, that we can supplement them if they can't afford it. I think it should be based on the Medicare system. We call it a Medicare buy-in. Tim Kaine has called it Medicare Part X. Some people call it Medicare Part E, with the E being for everybody. I don't care what we call it. I think that we should provide a baseline of care to everyone so that we can also control costs, because what we want is competition in the health and private health insurance market. If a private health insurer has to compete with a low-cost government alternative, then they'll have to keep their costs lower. That'll help you, that'll help me, and that'll help all of us because it'll keep our costs down. And employers might decide to get into the public option and not even provide that, and that would take a load off of their backs as well, especially small businesses. So that's what I think we have to do on healthcare. And I think right now we're seeing that this administration is actively trying to undermine the markets that are available, and that's going to raise premiums for the middle class. I think it's the wrong thing to do. Pete Sessions has been on the wrong side of this every single time.
Yeah, and I think for our listeners, lots of people don't realize the practicalities. People die every day
Yes.
because they lack health insurance.
That's right.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking briefly, I think during the break, it costs us more for
Yeah.
them to be. Tell us a little bit about that in your
Yeah.
opinion. How does it cost us more if
Right.
they're going to their, Parkland Hospital for their...
So, and this is basic preventative care. We understand that if you go to the doctor and you catch something early, that it's a much smaller deal than if you wait and end up in the emergency room being seen when you're at your worst and when the cost is at a premium. There's a reason why an IV is so expensive or an aspirin is so expensive in the emergency room. It's because we're subsidizing the care of all these folks who are indigent, who don't have health insurance and can't afford it.
Right.
We have a law in this country, as you know, that says that we don't turn anybody away from the emergency room, and that's the right thing. It used to be in this country that they literally had people dying in front of hospitals because they couldn't afford to come in.
Yeah.
We no longer wanted that to be the case. But what we have now set up is a system where we have a hidden tax on all of us, where we are, without realizing it, paying through our property taxes into a system to try and subsidize people who don't have health insurance when we are seeing them at their worst, when something could have been caught earlier, much less money.
Right.
And what we really want in this country isn't just health care. We want well care. Right? We want people to be well. We want them to be able to, early on in an illness, go get a quick pill, get it taken care of. An ulcer, for example, can become a huge issue if you don't take care of it. But we have a pill for it now.
Right.
And there are people right now here in Texas, here in Dallas, who are just hoping that a fever goes away, who are just hoping that that lump isn't what they think it might be, and they're going to put it off when we could just nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
And so that's how it costs us all more.
Okay. Our last topic that I wanted to cover, one that is certainly near and dear to my heart, education.
Yeah.
Here in the state of Texas, I think we just recently, Latino children in our public school systems have overcome that 50% threshold. We're now, the most represent here in DISD,
Been for a while.
94% people of color in our public school systems. Yet we see constantly attacks on our public education systems, both in the terms of taking away monies, certainly down in Austin, and then both, at the federal level. Some of the administration, Secretary of Education, incredible stuff.
Unbelievable.
Tell us your position, what it is you're kind of looking at once you kind of get in there.
So I believe that education is the magic bullet. I think it's the number one thing that we have that in our country that leads to opportunity, that reduces friction between groups of people. If you're more highly educated, you're more likely to be more open-minded, you're more likely to be less biased in terms of how you see other people, you live longer, you will have a higher, obviously income rate. All of these things are tied to education. And so and also, we're in a global fight. We are competing against the best and the brightest, not just from America, but from around the world now. Every job that's available is also available in many cases to people around the world.
Right.
And so to compete in this global economy, you have to have training. And the only way to do that is through our public education system for the majority of our kids. And we are failing them right now. We are not investing enough in our education system. And there are a couple of things that I think we have to do immediately at the federal level. Certainly, a lot of education is handled at the state and local level, but at the federal level, there's some things I want to do right now. Number one is universal pre-K. From every dollar we spend in pre-K, we get $8 back. It's the best investment that we make in education. Access to early childhood education helps in brain development for the kids. It helps them set them on the right path. It's also really important for the families of those kids because then they have a safe place where they can send their kids that doesn't cost them anything.
Right.
Pre-K is really the best investment that we make in education. So number one is universal pre-K. Number two, all the studies that I've seen show that the number one thing we can do when a kid is in a classroom to help their improvement is to give them a good teacher. It's not the class size, which is very important. It's not the facilities, which are very important. It's the teacher. That's the most important variable in their improvement. Now, when a kid comes into a class, there's all kinds of things they're carrying with them. But while they're in that class, how they improve is based on the quality of their teacher. And so we need to, as a country, prioritize, I believe, getting the best and the brightest teacher workforce in the world. And so how do we do that? We've actually done this in the past. When the Soviets were getting past us in the space race, we invested in trying to catch up to them. We can do it again. So we need to steer our best and our brightest into teaching through scholarships, through loan forgiveness for those who've already graduated who want to go into teaching. So we want to get them into the teaching pipeline. Then we want to keep them there by paying them what they're worth.
Right.
Teachers, there's no reason they shouldn't be paid what attorneys are getting paid. They have our most valuable resources in their hands, and we are treating them like they are nothing. So we need to pay them what they're worth, and then of course as part of that they'll get some professional responsibility that comes with getting paid more.
Right.
But we must pay them more, otherwise they will go into other areas where their talents will get them enough money to take care of their family.
Right.
And then we need to make sure that we retain them by making sure that we're not forcing them to do things that they don't want to do. And so many teachers that I talk to are frustrated with and concerned with the amount of time they have to spend teaching to a test.
Yeah.
And teaching on a formulaic system that only allows them to hit certain points, that doesn't allow them to teach critical thinking, that doesn't allow them to expand their kids' minds by touching on some things that maybe don't show up on a Scantron, but that do help you go find the answer when you're out there in the real world.
Right.
And so I think that the flexibility that teachers need is to let them be what they are, to be teachers. Let them have a chance to expose their kids to what they think is important for them to be exposed to. We will always need to have a level of testing to make sure that things are working out, right? But we got to end the era of high stakes testing in which districts, because so much money is tied to that test, districts are falling all over themselves to make sure that they get that money by forcing their teachers to have these very formulaic days. And I think that's something that we have to end. We want to provide incentives for doing the right thing that increases all of our chances, not by forcing people to teach to a test that's only going to show up on a Scantron. So I think that's what we have to do.
Absolutely. Colin, the last couple of minutes that we have, tell us a little bit about the race. We're actually in a primary, and then, of course, the general election in November.
Yeah, so we had our primary on March 6th. In Texas, you have to get over 50% to move on as the nominee from your party. We had 7 people in our race, so in my race I got first with about 38.5% of the vote. That's not enough to get to 50, so we have a runoff. I'm running against Lillian Salerno, who got about 18% of the vote. That election is on May 22nd, and the voter registration deadline for that is April 23rd. The good news for anybody out there who did not vote in the primary is that you can vote in the runoff. The only way you can't vote in the runoff is if you voted in the Republican primary, right? So if you voted in the Republican primary, you can only vote in the Republican runoff. But if you voted in the Democratic primary, or if you didn't vote at all, you can go vote in this primary, in this runoff here on May 22nd. And we need you to, because we were talking about this earlier. What we want in Texas is to make sure that we are no longer what they call a non-voting state. Right. So we're not a red state, and this is not a red district that I'm running in. It's a non-voting district, and we're a non-voting state. And largely, that does fall in communities of color. And so there are a lot of reasons for that. I think we've talked about a lot of it. Some of that is very purposeful. But we can overcome that as a community, and I think we can change our own destiny. And this, I think, is the most important election of our lifetime, because if we send a message that what's been going on and what they've done in Washington is okay, then we're going to get more of it, and it's going to become our new normal. If we send another message that we don't accept that that's not who we are, that we reject what's been going on, then I think we can come back from this. And I think that's what we're going to do in the fall. I think we've been seeing evidence of that across the country, and I think North Texas is going to step up here in November and send a message too. Colin, people who are listening in want to support you and do some things. How do they find out more information about you? Thanks, Eric. So my website is just my name, colinallred.com. That's ColinAllred.com. I have Facebook and Twitter pages that are also Colin Allred TX. You can get involved there and see where we have events and what's coming up. And we certainly would love to have any support of anybody who's out there. Even if you're not in this district, this is one of the most competitive districts that we have here in this area. Hillary Clinton won it by 2 points in 2016, and it's one of the ones that we can and should be competitive in here. And so you can get involved and help us try to flip this seat. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Colin Allred. Look for his name, support him if you can, and thank you so much, Colin, for coming on the show. Thank you, Appreciate you, man. Yep. All righty. You guys come right back. We're going to have our next guest, Mr. Brian Cuban, is going to be talking to you guys about what it is he does. He's authored a couple of books. So you guys will rejoin us in about 2 minutes.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at cedillolaw.com. That's cedillolaw.com.